I now have the honor of introducing an individual who was not only awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Biden earlier this year, but who then had a day named after him by the city of Los Angeles. The organization that he founded, Homeboy Industries, also received the 2020 Hilton Humanitarian Prize, but due to COVID, he has never stepped foot on this stage. I'm speaking of Father Gregory Boyle, founder of Homeboy. Yes, we can clap for him, absolutely. He is, of course, the founder of Homeboy Industries, the largest gang intervention, rehabilitation, and re-entry program in the world. Born and raised in LA, and a Jesuit priest, Father Boyle witnessed the devastating impact of gang violence on his community, and speaking of a way forward, worked with his parish and community members to adopt what was a radical approach at the time, treating gang members as human beings. Father Greg has written multiple books, including his forthcoming book, which is called Cherished Belonging: The Healing Power of Love in Divided Times. Please join me in welcoming Father Boyle, Father Greg Boyle, to our stage.
Thank you very much. Priests and ministers always put their watch down and then fail to consult it ever again. So it's an honor indeed to be here with all of you. First of all, I want to extend my felicidades to Nemonte and Mitch and Amazon Frontlines, un premio bien merecido. I always think a symposium like this is a little bit like what Martin Luther King used to talk about of church. He would say, it's not the place you come to, it's the place you go from. So though we're just beginning this morning, this will be the place that we go from. And we go from here to create a community of cherished belonging. We go from here to create a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it. Peter said something last night that was indeed so profound and helpful. He said, the moment arrives when we discover that we are kin. And that moment is what we long for. And so we will go from here today to imagine a circle of compassion and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle. We will go from here to dismantle the barriers that exclude. And we will go from here to stand at the margins, as Amazon Frontlines does every day, so that the margins get erased. We go from here to stand with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless, to stand with those whose dignity has been denied and those whose burdens are more than they can bear. We go from here to await that moment when we can discover that we are kin. We go from here to stand with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop. And with the easily despised and the readily left out, we go from here to stand with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. We go from here knowing that systems change when people change, and people change when they are cherished. We go from here with the sure and certain knowledge that cherishing is love with its sleeves rolled up. And we go to the margins and we brace ourselves, as every laureate in this room knows, for people to accuse you of wasting your time. But the prophet Jeremiah writes, "For in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing." You go from here and other voices get heard. And that is as it should be. I remember a number of years ago, I was invited to speak to 600 social workers in Richmond, Virginia. And it was a gang in service where they were want to explain to social workers why kids join gangs and what are we to do about it. And so these social workers, would commandeer a hotel ballroom from 9 to 5 and have keynotes and breakout sessions and workshops. And I'd done a lot of these over my years, and so I said yes, and I bought my ticket. Well, a week before I was to fly, I pull out the letter inviting me, and to my horror, I discovered that I was to be the only speaker from 9 to 5 all damn day. And as the homies would say, oh, hell no, I'm not going to be the only speaker. So I got two trainees, two homies, Jose and Andre, African-American gang member, Latino enemies. They were from enemy gangs. And I said, look, at the end of the week, you're flying with me to Richmond, Virginia. I'd like you to get up in front of 600 social workers and tell your stories. Take your time. Because we got a long-ass day to fill. Well, I'd never heard their stories before, and Jose gets up first, and he's, 25 years old, and he had been, in prison, a shot caller from his gang, heavily tattooed, and at that juncture in his 18-month training, he was in his 9th month, and he was a very valued member of our substance use disorder team, a man solid in his own recovery. And now he was helping younger homies and homegirls with their addiction issues. And so not only had he been in prison and a gang member, he also had a long stretch as a homeless man, even longer stretch as a heroin addict. So he gets up in front of the social workers and he says, I guess you could say my mom and me, we didn't get along so good. I think I was 6 when she looked at me and she said, why don't you just kill yourself? You're such a burden to me. Well, 600 social workers audibly gasp. And then he says, it sounds way worser in Spanish, And they went from gasp to laugh. But then he continued. He said, I think I was 9. When my mom drove me down to the deepest part of Baja California, and she walked me up to an orphanage, and she knocked on the door, and the guy came to the door, and she said, I found this kid. And she left me there for 90 days until my grandmother could get out of her where she had dumped me, and my grandmother came and rescued me. My mom beat me every single day of my elementary school years with things you could imagine and a lot of things you couldn't. Every day my back was bloodied and scarred. In fact, I had to wear 3 t-shirts to school each day. First t-shirt because the blood would seep through, and the second t-shirt you could still see it. Finally, the third t-shirt you couldn't see any blood. Kids at school, they'd make fun of me. Hey, fool, it's 100 degrees. Why are you wearing 3 t-shirts? And then he stopped speaking, so overwhelmed with emotion, and he seemed to be staring at a piece of his story that only he could see. And when he could regain his speech, he said through his tears, I wore 3 t-shirts well into my adult years because I was ashamed of my wounds. I didn't want anybody to see them. But now I welcome my wounds. I run my fingers over my scars. My wounds are my friends. After all, how can I help heal the wounded if I don't welcome my own wounds? And as they say in the Acts of the Apostles, and awe came upon everyone. What St. Ignatius of Loyola calls acatamiento, affectionate awe. It is our stance out at the margins as we receive people, as we hold them, as we cherish them. 10,000 people a year walk through our doors at Homeboy Industries, and all of them come barricaded behind a wall of shame and disgrace, and the only thing that can scale that wall is tenderness. Cherishing is love with its sleeves rolled up. It occurs sometimes, especially universities, to force their students to read my books against their will. And I'm not complaining, but my alma mater, Gonzaga University in Spokane, who ruins my bracket every March, invited me to go there because they had forced the incoming freshmen to read Tattoos on the Heart. And they said, bring 2 homies with you. And so I did, and I had Mario and I had Larry. And I always pick homies who are enemies just to force them to share a hotel room together, just to mess with them. And I always pick homies who have never flown before, just for the thrill of watching gang members panic in the sky. And I took 2 homies once. We were at LAX, and one of them said to me, hey, are we flying Virgin Airlines because it's our first time? I said, yes, it's a requirement. We'll be coming home on American. So anyway, I picked Mario and Larry. And Mario, it was the most nervous person I've ever flown with. He was just absolutely terrified. And he was hyperventilating, which I had never seen before. And we hadn't even, boarded the plane yet. So we're at Burbank Airport, smallish plane, and we're waiting, first flight of the day, and I see our flight crew arrives, and they're 2 female flight attendants, and they both have large cups of Starbucks coffee, and at Burbank, you board the plane by walking up the steps to board the plane, and Mario goes, when are we gonna board the plane? And I said, well, as soon as they sober up the pilots. There they go now. So we get to Gonzaga, and they have us talk to a whole bunch of classes before we begin. And we have the big venue, 1,000 people in the evening, and they told their stories. I said, I'm going to sit in the back of the classroom. And they told their stories of violence and torture and abuse of every imaginable kind. And honest to God, if their stories had been flames, you'd have to brace yourselves, because you'd get scorched if you got too close. So we get up, and I have them speak in front of 1,000 people, and Mario in particular was quite nervous, and I did my thing. And then I invite them up for the question and answer, and I said, yes, ma'am. And a woman stands, and she says, yeah, I got a question. The question's for Mario. And Mario's just terrified, and he's a tall, skinny drink of water, and he's hanging onto the microphone. He says, yes. And she says, well, Mario, you say you're a father, you have a son and a daughter, they're about to enter their teenage years. What wisdom do you impart to them? What advice do you give them? And Mario closes his eyes, and he clutches the microphone. He's starting to tremble, and he's getting a friggin' hernia trying to come up with whatever the hell he's gonna say. When suddenly he blurts out, as soon as he says those 2 words, he rushes back to his microphone, clutching refuge. And now I know he's losing his battle with his tears, but he wants to get the whole sentence out. I just don't want my kids to turn out to be like me. And there's silence until the woman stands and she says, why wouldn't you want your kids to turn out to be like you? You are loving, you are kind, you are gentle, you are wise. I hope your kids turn out to be like you. And 1,000 total perfect strangers stand, and they will not stop clapping, and all Mario can do hold his face in his hand, so overwhelmed that this room full of strangers had returned him to himself. And he had been returned as everybody standing was. And the moment arrives when we discover that we are kin. It is what we long for as human beings. We long to know that there is no us and them, that there's just us. We long to be returned to ourselves and discover our true selves in loving. We long to know that loving is our home, and once you know that, you're never going to be homesick. We want to know the power of cherishing. For systems change when people do, and people change when they're cherished. And this symposium is not the place you've come to. It was always going to be the place you go from. And you go from here to imagine a circle of compassion, and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle, where we no longer need to brace ourselves as people accuse us of wasting our time. For in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. God bless you all for what you do. Thank you.